Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I have been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to march forward through yet another season together. As always, you can find our 100% free, 24/7 boots on the ground coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars when you follow us on social media such as Facebook and Twitter at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. All right, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and I am your beat reporter. Today, we are going to talk about the key lesson that we are going to learn from the Jaguars in Week 7. Now, up to this point, through 6 games, Jags are 4-2. They start out 1-1, dropped their Week 2 game against the Bengals, then won 3 games in a row to improve the 4-1 for losing 20-12 to the Seattle Seahawks in Week 6. To me, the Seahawks loss gives us an opportunity to see what the Jaguars are actually made of. And that's not to take away from wins against the Texans, 49ers, and Chiefs. All impressive wins. All much-needed wins. But how do the Jaguars respond after a loss? I mean, Jaguars head coach Liam Cohen himself absolutely lauded Rams head coach Sean McVay on Wednesday from London for how well he coaches after a loss, for how his teams bounce back the next week. And we've seen the Jaguars after a loss once under Liam Cohen. Jaguars lose that game against Cincinnati, a very mistake-filled game, a very winnable game that they more or less dominated, that they let get away from them. The next week, the defense has its best game of the year against the Houston Texans. The offense has one of its weakest games of the year. It's either that or the Seahawks game against the Texans. Score only 17 points, and that last touchdown was a gimme by Houston. But what you did see that week was a Jaguars team that didn't crumble. You saw a Jaguars team make plays in the fourth quarter to secure that win. Trevor Lawrence's big throw to Brian Thomas Jr. to get them in the scoring range. Josh Hines-Allen deflecting the C.J. Stroud pass, which was then intercepted by Antonio Johnson. Tyson Campbell forcing a fumble on Nico Collins after giving up a touchdown to Nico Collins earlier in the game. So you've seen this Jaguars team respond to adversity in that fashion. We've seen the Jaguars prove that they are mentally and physically tough. I don't think that's a question. Now, yes, they did get out-physicaled against the Seahawks. That was the first game out of 6 that I felt like they were not the more physical team. But that, to me, is why it's so key to see how do they really respond this week. How well does Liam Cohen coach off of a loss? And it wasn't just a loss where you just, tip your cap to the other team. They simply were a better team that day. They outplayed them. Because while it's true, the Seahawks did outplay the Jaguars that day. That can't be disputed. The Jaguars were also their own worst enemy. The Jaguars failed to set themselves up for any kind of success against the Seahawks due to the same things that have been popping up. Penalties, ill-fated plays in key situations. And to me, that is the major reason why this is such a key game for the Jaguars. They lost to the Bengals for similar things. They lost that game themselves. They let it get out of hand. Now the question is, do they respond this week the way they responded a few weeks ago? How do they respond from getting punched in the mouth? Because that's what the Seahawks did. There's no mincing words about it. For the first time this year, the Jaguars got bullied, especially in the trenches. Jaguars had their lowest pressures and pressure rate of the season, and they allowed their highest pressures and highest pressure rate of the season on the offense side of the ball. Trevor Lawrence was sacked 7 times. it was the worst game the offensive line had under the Liam Cohen era. It would have been one of the worst games the offensive line had in the Doug Peterson era. It didn't look like the offensive line from the first month of the season that was playing really good football, and it's kind of slipped in the last 2 weeks. And how much of that has to do with starting center Robert Hainsey out is a fair question. But rookie center Jonah Monheim, I didn't think was a liability when you go back and watch the game. So what was the real reason the Jaguars simply got smacked around by the Seahawks? My gut tells me the Jaguars are simply running on fumes after Monday Night Football. It's a short week. They were banged up. And you could just feel there was kind of a dead energy in the stadium on Sunday getting there. Yeah, I absolutely do think that in a way there was a hangover from Monday night. Not in the sense of they thought they had arrived and all they had to do on Sunday to win was show up. I did not get that vibe. The vibe I did get, though, that they were a tired and hurt team. And that they, had steps they had to take to even make that a ball game. I mean, they come out, the level of flatness they came out with on that first drive on offense, I think kind of said it all. They simply were not ready to play a game that day. But that is why it is so key for Liam Cohen to prove this Sunday against the Los Angeles Rams in London that he can reverse that trend. That he can give the Jaguars the tools that they need to not drop 2 games in a row. It's one thing Calais Campbell always said. Good teams don't lose 2 games in a row. And sometimes they do. Chiefs, start 0-2 this year? So it happens. Good teams do drop 2 games in a row. But the great teams are able to learn from those losses, put it behind them, and improve the next week. And we've learned a lot about the Liam Cohen era Jaguars to this point. I think this is still something we have to learn about them. How do they respond to the adversity of getting punched in the mouth? How do they bounce back the week after a tough game that was disappointing for a number of reasons in front of their home fans? Everything that I've seen from Liam Cohen so far, everything I've learned about him, everything I've heard about him from people who coach with him, people who play for him, is that he will push the right buttons this week. But regardless of his tactics, it's simply a results-oriented business. And he's mentioned rightfully, the process over results approach. That even after the Chiefs win, they were pretty upset because they felt like they didn't play very well. And that is the right approach to have in the long-term view. It 100% is. But it's also the NFL. It's an incredibly hard league to win in. And if you can win by 1 point and pull it by the skin of your teeth, that's what you got to do that week. You rarely will find coaches and players who, after a win, have regret about the way the win happened. And yes, this Jaguars team seemed frustrated by the way they played against the Chiefs. That's the right way to be. But they would have been a lot more frustrated if they didn't win the game. So how does Liam Cohen get the proper results from his team this weekend? Can Liam Cohen have his team rebound from a tough loss against a good team to prepare for another really good team, a Hall of Fame quarterback, a potentially Hall of Fame head coach, and Sean McVay? Some elite talent on the defensive side of the ball. Jared Verse, one of the best players the Jags will face this year. Byron Young's fantastic. Kobe Turner's fantastic. Braden Fisk is fantastic. Poona Ford's fantastic. So we will learn a lot about this Jaguars team, I believe, this weekend when they take on the Rams. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. We'll be back next time.